Hi, this is the second part of our podcast about Nigel Flanagan's book, Our Trade Unions. Now, the podcast does stand by itself, but we do recommend that you listen to part one first. It's available on the usual platforms. Thanks very much for tuning in. Moving on. You're right, later on in the book, fundamentally, unions must put political demands at the heart of their organising. But later, you say the change is a political imperative, not a financial one. It's needed in order to reconstruct the lost notions of class, solidarity, collectivism, and the alternatives to capitalism. It's not about a service to members, but about a lifting an alternative to low wages, multi-working, zero hours, privatisation, unsafe working, exploitation, inequality, racism, and nationalism. We're in a fight, and it's a class war. But then you suggest later the union should stop giving money to the Labour Party and the TUC and elsewhere and concentrate on organising to recruit. Is there a wee potential contradiction here, Nick?
I think that's a fair point to make because one of the things I personally felt critical of was Sharon Graham's decision as General Secretary of Unite not to attend the Labour Party conference. I thought politically that was a mistake, and I know it didn't mean that Unite were not at the conference, but I think given her recent election and the circumstances of her election, which was really about an excitement about organising, it would have been really beneficial to the movement and to the left to have seen her at conference taking on some of the arguments. So my argument isn't that we should abandon the Labour Party or that we should abandon the TUC. I suppose my argument really is about scale and about priorities. So the union I know best, Unison, pays millions of pounds to the Labour Party as part of its affiliation, and millions of pounds to the TUC as part of its affiliation. And every year has an annual conference that costs around approximately £7 million. The scale of that expenditure, is massive. So we're talking, nearly £15 million every year goes on those political objectives. What I would say to Unison is not that you take an instant decision to end those things, because there are political consequences, certainly in relation to the Labour Party, but instead to reorganise what you're doing with that money and say maybe we affiliate less people. Maybe we reduce our affiliation fees and ring fence that money for organising funds to be given directly to Unison branches. Maybe we decide that annual conference, £7 million every year, maybe we go every 2 years for an experimental period to see, does that undermine our democracy? There are other recall mechanics that you can put in place in case there is a need for recall. And maybe that £7 million can be put back in an organising fund that goes direct to branches. So I'm not producing a blueprint here for any trade union saying X amount should be diverted to organising. But I do think in general terms, the trade unions have got millions of pounds worth of assets, and it's not being deployed into organising on the whole. It's being deployed into lobbying. It's being deployed into policy making. It's being deployed into all kinds of things that you think, given that, let's come back to it, only 1.8% of workers aged between 16 and 19 in the British economy are members of a trade union. How are we spending our money in the right place if we're going to make sure that trade union power and trade union influence is sustained in the next 10 or 20 years' time? I would argue that's a crisis, and we need to address that crisis. And if that means we have to cut back our affiliation to all these august bodies of the trade union movement, well, so be it. The election results, the balloting results, in Unison over the NHS pay crisis are not quite as impressive as the television would like us to believe. That in most of their NHS branches, Unison did not reach the 50% turnout threshold that is required for the vote to be valid, and also to get a yes vote. Now, I don't know that they're not doing this, so this is not like me saying, oh, Unison have ignored it. I'm sure the activists are having a furious debate amongst themselves about how that happened and what they can do about it. But they're the issues that we've got to address. And part of the solution to those issues is what are we spending our money on? We could give that money to rank and file branches who could use that quite directly in knowledge of their own local circumstances in a way that would address many of the problems that the National Union has failed to address so far. So I think that, yeah, I'm quite happy to take it on the chin. You know, maybe we can't completely disaffiliate from the Labour Party or from the TUC, but I think somebody's got to say it. It's like the Emperor's new clothes. Somebody's got to say we are spending millions on that in return for what? And so maybe what we need to do is refocus where our money is being spent.
So could I partly characterize what you say or what you believe by, in order to make real political impact and affect real political change, we need to focus on organising so we have the sort of critical mass that we had back in the post-war years?
That's you put it better than me. I wish I'd written that in the book. That's a really good summary, Stuart, is that we can't continue to pretend that we enjoy the same power and influence that we had in the 70s just by virtue of the fact that we have institutions that are well funded. It's kind of falling, it's crumbling beneath our feet. That's the problem. And those 16 to 19-year-olds, you know, nearly 98% of whom are not members of trade unions, are not going to be impressed in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time about what happened in the 60s and 70s. It will mean nothing to them. At the moment, the trade unions have had this upsurge of activity, but there is a real danger of dissolution setting in as quickly as the upsurge started, because none of the deals, national deals, I stress, are, you know, above the rate of inflation or are exactly what the unions set out claiming. And we had, you know, the Royal College of Nursing, for example, even halfway through its strike, undersold its bargaining position by saying they would be prepared to accept 7% on the back of a 19% pay claim. So, you know, that does impact on workers. Workers do think, well, what was all that about then? I've been on strike, I've lost a week's wages, and you're already saying, oh, we'd accept 7%. You're assuming that that's what I would do. Now, I'm sure a lot of workers would, you know, because the reality is they are in a crisis. But that can also become part of the problem again, that we learn again that the unions can sometimes fall short of what the members' expectations are.
You talked about young people before, and you do actually have a very nice little section on this. Well, I say very nice, very nicely put section, even though it's quite depressing. You say, this is a generation who can't afford to buy houses or pay rent, who cannot live life meaningfully on benefits or on low-paid work. The victims of racism, sexual discrimination, inequality, other forms of discrimination and exploitation at work. Then what is the trade union movement saying to them about their lives? Now, you say here that these are very vulnerable people, and if the working class movement doesn't do something about this and doesn't address their issues and present itself as a movement offering viable solutions, other forces will take the initiative, driven by the needs of the market or the prejudices of reactionaries. Now, this resonates with me. My kids are suffering from these issues right now, as indeed are their mates. They don't see the unions as any sort of solution. It doesn't crop up at all in their conversations. They don't really feature on the radar. Now, these are, generally speaking, middle-class, educated kids with increasingly working-class problems. How do we change that mindset? Because this is pretty damned important.
Well, the first thing that occurs to me about that is which mindset are we changing? Because are we changing the mindset of young people? In which case, that, you know, there's a danger that looks like we were saying, you need to become more like us. Or is it changing the mindset of the trade union bureaucracy, the leadership, and the layer of activists who need to understand a lot better that this is a real danger, that these people are never going to be part of the trade union family? I think the first thing that I would suggest that needs to be done is that we need to ask the young people. We need to ask them, okay, you know, what is a trade union? Why is it not in your consciousness? What difference would you want it to make? What would you want it to be doing? What do you feel it could offer you to make it attractive for you to join and become active? And I think we have to do that first. And I don't like a lot of the current trade unions kind of I will call on them, almost like a charade of young people's involvement, that they take the existing young people who are members of the union and try and nurture them on their own, whilst continuing to ignore the fact that 98% of the people they work with are not joining the trade unions. These young people are the most political generation that I think I've seen, even much more so than when I was a young person. I won't go that far back. Black Lives Matter, environmental issues, equality issues. It's all young people, anti-racism. It's all young people who are leading these movements and getting involved in them. And they're not turning up inside the trade union movement. Even the recent sort of experience of Corbynism and momentum and those kind of progressive elements inside the Labour Party, the biggest appeal of that was to young people. And, you know, I'm so depressed at hearing about so many young people saying, Corbyn got me interested in politics again. Now he's gone, I'm not really interested. So it's our mindset that has to change, as well as the mindset, if you like, of young people. But what I would do is embark straight away on a huge listening exercise with young people who are not members of trade unions, by tying the union movement really clearly and visibly to Black Lives Matter, Stop the War campaigns, anti-racism campaigns, and saying, we stand for something very, very different. And we've got resources, and we've got democracy, and you can be part of this. And if you don't use these facilities, these weapons that are lying around for working class people, you're really lessening your chances of doing anything about the things that you really care about. Let me just finish on this one, Stuart. I did get involved in supporting Black Lives Matter's campaigns and demonstrations and protests in Liverpool, where I live. And it was really heartening. I mean, to see young Black activists leading a movement and organising it. We had a day of solidarity on the Liverpool waterfront during the lockdown with American trade unions who were walking out for the day. I don't know if you remember that. Some American trade unions organised a day of strike action in support of BLM. It was fantastic. And I did spend a bit of time afterwards just casually talking to the leaders and activists. And none of them were involved in trade unions. You know, and I did feel a bit like, yeah, I'm the old white guy with the white beard. And, you know, they think, yeah, it's good that you come to support us, but you don't represent anybody that's a really powerful ally. And then I thought, but I do. You know, I'm from the trade union movement. The difference is you should be the activist in the trade union movement, and I should be one of the supporters. So I think that, to me, really summed it up. And it did come back to that, what we started with, this subconscious sort of attitude towards issues of racism and Black oppression that exists inside trade union leaderships who are still nervous and don't want to be too closely associated with it. What we attended in Liverpool and what we supported in Liverpool was the exact opposite of that. So let's ask young people first, let them tell us, and give them the resources and let them get on with it. Because the best will in the world, we're not able to go up and start organising young workers.
I'm going to read out quite a long a long paragraph in the book, but I think it's beautiful and we need to talk about this. AI. You say, if AI is used to benefit all, the most obvious claim that trade unions must produce is for a set of demands for a drastic reduction in working time and a huge increase in public provision of leisure, educational and medical facilities. We should argue to go beyond a 4-day working week based around attendance towards task-driven working arrangements with guaranteed incomes, pensions, insurance, and a dramatic increase in leisure, health and educational facilities that will create more work. These social demands are central to a trade union future. We should, as in the past, emblazon them on trade union banners: healthcare for all, a 5-day working week, justice in housing, national ownership and education for all. This is a central requirement of trade union revival, its vision of the future. Is there any thinking or planning of this nature taking place at the moment in the union movement? And does that movement have the ability, stroke expertise, to produce cogent, substantiated plans of this nature?
It's a fundamental question, Stuart, and in a way it relates to the previous question about young workers, because there is a new economy out there. And the trade unions, by and large, are completely absent from it. It's a new economy that's based around digital working, online working, very, very sort of casualized and very, very, what we often refer to as precarious. But there's an element of it that is appealing to young workers, which is it's not an organized working week. It's not an organized 9-to-5 day. It can suit different kinds of lifestyles and new responsibilities that many young people have. And yet it's the one area, well, the big area, the growing area of the economy where we're very, very, very much on the outside. One of the things I didn't talk about in the book at all, which if I was to do it again, I would actually make more reference to some of the so-called micro-pop-up unions that are occurring, particularly in the Greater London area, who seem to be much more focused on this kind of work and this kind of employment lifestyle. And they seem to get it more than the mainstream trade unions do, that this is the future of work. You know, we're still focusing on wages and terms and conditions that are about pre-COVID. And it's, although COVID has had a significant impact on how we see work, actually all these forces were at play before COVID. So are the unions looking at it? I think some of the unions are looking at it, but they're essentially trying to catch up with changes that the employers have already introduced. And therefore, you know, unions like PCS and CWU, who are very sort of very good at organising call centre type services in the public sector. And a lot of these issues are arising in those corners of the economy that we have people who don't want to work 9 to 5, they don't want to work 5 days a week. And if they lose out in some cases in terms of pensions and security in order to have a more flexible working arrangement, that's the choice they have to make now, and that they have to take the flexibility over the security. I think PCS and CWU are looking at this flexibility, security, so-called contradiction, and are starting to think of organising strategies around that. So I want to give them credit for doing that. But mainstream union-wise, I don't think it's happening. There are policy papers written by people at the TUC. There are public service announcements about, you know, the TUC has produced a pamphlet on this, or information on this, or research on this. But actually organising in those sectors is not happening at all. It's not happening at all. I'd like to give one example of it, of how difficult it can be for trade unions, but how they've got to face up to it, is that Amazon operates a service called Mechanical Turk. I don't know if you've heard of it. And at the moment, there are about 500,000 workers registered with it. And they simply log on. Sometimes they have another job and they do it in their lunchtime or their break time. They log on and carry out simple online tasks for a small amount of money. And that some of them will do that on top of their regular employment, or some workers who are also carers for children or the elderly will do it from home. And that is a massive growing area of employment, that there's so much work now that can be done online and can be done remotely or from your own device, as the employers term it, that workers are no longer, it's like the movement from the land into factories. Workers are now leaving offices and working from home. And the trade unions need to catch up with that social development, because it's happening quickly and it's happening now. And how do you organise workers who never meet each other? To me, that comes back to spiderwebbing, because the security guards never see each other. They stand on their own. The call centre workers in Morocco, they were mostly people on temporary, flexible working contracts who moved from one company to the other all the time. Spidering was the one thing that kept the connection between the worker and their trade union, despite the fact that they maybe have 2 or 3 jobs, or they would move employers every 6 months, every year or so. So I think that I would say this: the unions at the moment are not capable of organising those workers. But that's not to say that some unions have not already twigged that and think we need to start thinking about how we're going to do this. But they're not doing it quickly enough, Stuart. That's the problem that I was talking to earlier about resources. You know, this is not the time for having seminars and discussions. This is the time for saying, okay, we know what the problem is. We know what we have got to do, let's put the resources into doing it. And not give up after a year if it's not working. It's got to be commitment to these plans. The Kenyan security guards could have given up after a year, but they didn't. You know, after 5 years, they grew to 100,000 members, became the largest trade union in Africa, and exercised real power on behalf of their members inside that economy. And power that's really, really needed. I always trace that back, that the incident that triggered this trade union campaign inside the security sector was a terrorist attack in Nairobi, a shopping centre where 146 people were shot and killed by religious terrorists. And the first person who was killed was the security guard. He couldn't stop the terrorists getting into the shopping mall. He only had a stick and a radio and a whistle and a hat. And they shot and killed him first, and then got into the shopping mall and massacred all those people. That was the incident that triggered in the union's mind. They paid for the guy's funeral. They looked after his family and said, this is what happens to security guards in Kenya. And they were able to point out that this shopping mall was a westernized shopping mall in Nairobi. And all the normal big Western global companies were in there. You know, companies like Gap, companies like Next. They were all compensated for the loss of business due to the fact that the shopping mall was closed down after all the damage and the murders, etc. The security guard received nothing. His wages stopped on the day that he was killed. And that story is what the union used to illustrate what their campaign was about. We need more of those stories, and we need more of the energy that campaign brought, organised in a systematic way to renew the trade unions in Britain.
I think we can certainly learn from that experience. You talked about the Popup union, so-called, before. We can probably learn from them as well. A couple of my kids' friends work for the Popup unions, and interesting, quite a few of the people in those organisations don't speak English, or they speak English as very much a second language. And this is, again, where we got to think about developing some linguistic skills, think a little bit outside the regular trade union box. Of course, the great example there is James Connolly, who learned Italian, so he's able to address the Italian dock workers in the States whenever he was organising them. Nigel, we could talk about this all night, but we need to go ahead and come to a close quite quickly, sir. The second and last question. Be quite quick here, mate. What has been the union reaction to the book so far?
Well, the reaction of most activists and organisers that I work with has been really very, very positive, in the sense that they recognise that what I'm saying about the state of the trade union movement at the moment, they recognise that as being the truth. And although nobody publicly wants really to say it that much, they are worried that we are in a permanent terminal state of decline. And despite all the excitement over the summer, that things are going to revert back to depressing normal if the unions don't seize the moment, so to speak. So I think at that level, I've been speaking at regional and branch meetings inside Unison, inside other trade unions, inside the TUC, and getting a really, really good, positive reception. That doesn't mean everybody agrees with me, but I think people are satisfied that I'm raising a legitimate debate about the future of trade unions. The RMT have invited me to speak at their organising conference in Newcastle in April. I'm really excited to do that because when I did write the book, I identified RMT actually as one of the exceptions to the rule in terms of how well organised it was. And of course, that's been demonstrated by their activity of strike action over the summer. So most reactions have been very positive. I've had some negativity from certain trade unions who are not happy about some of the figures I report inside the book about the decline of their particular membership. But, you know, I'm not attacking the trade unions. I'm saying you've got problems. We've got problems. We've got to do something about it. And there's a lot of good going on inside the trade union movement. There are some brilliant activists, great organisers. And that's what the book is about saying, you are the people who can help, who can make the change. This book is about hoping that you will make that change.
It's a very hard-hitting and very important book, so it's kind of heartening to hear that people haven't responded to it in a negative or aggressive fashion. Okay, last question. What are the three main things? Now, it might not be three, it might just be two, it could be 2.5, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Three main things that you would like your readers to gather from the book, and what would you like them to do with that knowledge?
Okay, well, three quick answers to that, Stuart. I think the first thing, the main point at the beginning of the book is, look, face the reality. Look at these figures. Look with your own eyes, you can see it. The movement is not awash with young people or young workers from the private sector parts of the economy. So let's face the reality and address that issue. Secondly, let's abandon these failed strategies. Let's stop thinking that we can offer services to customers who will come and join us and that will sustain. We already know now over the last 30, 40 years, that doesn't work. And abandon the strategy of community organising based on full-time professional organisers flooding workplaces and putting everything, gambling everything on what they can do. It doesn't work, comrades. You know, it doesn't work. We have small scale, brilliant small scale successes, and Unite have been better than most of that. But there's nothing nationally that can be impacted by the use of full-time professional organisers. Refocus the resources. And lastly, the biggest resource we have is members. Embrace asking members to take part. Embrace the fact that that's the biggest source of our power, and embrace the fact that they need to be given democratic control of their union. And that is the thing that will lead, in my view, to most sustainable union renewal.
Fantastic. Nigel, thank you very much indeed. This has been one of the more rewarding CommieCasts we've ever done. I hope people enjoy it, and I hope it makes them think. Anything you want to say before we have to say cheerio?
The one thing I want to say, Stuart, is please invite me to come and talk to your union branch, your trades council, your union conference, wherever. I'm very, very happy to do it. I had some really productive meetings and really engaging meetings with comrades all across the movement. I'm very happy to come out and talk to you about the book. And again, it's part of the debate. Let's have the debate and then let's take action.
I'm sure you'll get plenty of offers there, mate, and maybe some offers outside as well. Okay, this has been CommieCast. We are anti-racist, anti-fascist, anti-capitalist, but very much pro-trade union. Nigel, it's been great. Thank you very much indeed. All the best, and good night.